On today's World Insight with Jin Wei, fears over aviation safety after the Ethiopia crash. Are Boeing 737 MAX aircraft airworthy? And America's own human rights record in 2018, a blind eye on its own rights violation?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing on Sunday. An Ethiopian airline flight crashed near Ethiopia's capital, killing all people on board. Less than 5 months ago, a Lion Air flight of the same model had plunged into the Java Sea, also shortly after takeoff, leaving no survivors. On Monday, China was the first country to ban the aircraft in question. And now, 4 days after the Ethiopia air disaster, Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes are not getting off the ground anytime soon.
Another plane that never touched down. On Sunday at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, people waited to pick up their friends and families flying in from Addis Ababa. Instead, they received news that Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 had crashed minutes after takeoff. None of the 149 passengers and 8 crew members on board survived. Another fatal accident less than 5 months after a similar Boeing plane crashed into the Java Sea.
Yeah, a passenger jet carrying nearly 190 people has crashed into the sea north of Jakarta.
The reason for that crash is still being investigated, but one detail is alarming. In both crashes, it is the exact same model of plane, a new product from Boeing, adapted from its popular 737 series called 737 MAX 8. China was the first country to ground the jet, along with the 737 MAX 9.
Grounded, suspended.
And after days of mounting pressure, the U.S. was the last major country to follow suit.
The planes are grounded.
Boeing, a U.S. aircraft manufacturer based in Washington state, insisted the plane is safe. While no official conclusion has been drawn, some theories have been floated. The new Boeing plane was put into use in 2017, and compared to earlier models, the plane has a tendency to tilt up. To counter this, a software program known as MCAS is put in place and will automatically point the nose of the plane to the ground. Analysts speculate that the pilots could have lost control of the plane to the system. Some pilots in the U.S. had recently raised concerns that they had trouble controlling their Boeing 737 MAX 8 jets during critical moments of flight. Boeing said on Monday that it is planning to make a safety upgrade to software that is to be deployed across the 737 MAX fleet in the coming weeks. But for grief-stricken family and relatives of passengers lost in the Ethiopia air crash, it's a painful wait for answers.
That pain is being shared around the world. How worried should we be about the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft safety? Let's ask our panelists. In Washington, D.C., Mark Weiss, the American Airlines retired president of the Weiss Consulting Group. And also in D.C., we have Seth Kaplan, an aviation journalist. In Beijing, He Wenping, a professor at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. She's been researching about Africa for decades. Welcome to the three of you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to go to you first, Mr. Weiss. You are the aviation expert here. Why it takes such a long time for people around the world to know that actually the model has been changed and even the pilots did not know?
Well, the basic platform of the 737 has been around since the mid to late 60s. The modifications for this new MAX 8, MAX 9 derivative incorporated different engines and placement on the wing and a few other modifications. There's an economic issue tied to all of this. When an airplane comes out, you have to go through a lot of procedures to make sure that A, it's certified properly, and crews are trained correctly. Because this was a modification, basically, of an older airframe, Boeing believed that what they needed to do was just make those modifications without having to call it a new airplane, therefore minimizing, in many ways, the amount of training that would be required or the information brought out on the new procedures on this aircraft.
Got it. Mr. Weiss, if I could follow up, what is making an airplane manufacturer qualified to judge whether or not one thing is, shall I say, modification or not?
Well, you have a family of airplanes. Airbus does this with their A320-30 models, that they will modify the aircraft that's just slightly different from the previous model. Boeing has done this with their 737 and now with their 777s, very similar. The differences of this is that you don't have to go through a completely new training course when you go from one aircraft type or model to the next. You go through what they call a differences training, which could be a few hours or a few days. And I think therein lies some of the problem that we've seen with this aircraft.
Right.
In
Mr.
that
Cap,
Go ahead. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, sir. Finish your last sentence, please, Mr. Weiss.
Well, the modifications on this aircraft really changed the flight characteristics. And I think one of the important parameters to take a look at is what level of training and notifications were the flight crews given, other than just a handout? Did they practice this in a simulator? Because the parameters were very different, obviously.
Okay, Mr. Kaplan, since the tragedy over the Java Sea to the latest incident, we see quite a number of the accidents happen already. What is making the delay from the decision, whether it is by the plane manufacturer or by airlines around the world, to check into details about what exactly is going on with this model?
Yeah, well, following the first tragedy with Lion Air, Boeing did provide some of those additional details that Mr. Weiss was talking about. You know, initially they felt like this was something, apparently, that they thought pilots didn't have to fully understand. I mean, look, it's sort of like you drive a car, you don't always have to understand everything about how that car works. That's sort of the approach that Boeing took here, but it turns out that actually this was a critical piece of information. This, to be clear, was a system that was designed to prevent things that had caused previous accidents. Some famous accidents over the years caused because pilots, in a panic when the plane seemed to be stalling, did what probably most of the rest of us who aren't pilots would do, right? They tried to pull back on the yoke and climb. Actually, you're supposed to tilt the nose down. That helps you regain airspeed, lift the plane up. So a lot of people said, well, why can't there be a system to automate that? That's what this system was supposed to do. But as Mr. Weiss said, you know, that's a change from what pilots were used to. And in the case of the Lion Air crash, rather clearly, the pilots struggled with that system. After the Lion Air crash, you know, I think a lot of airlines, while on one hand, yes, they wanted the additional information to provide to their pilots, they were willing to sort of accept the explanation that there was some blame to go around here, that the airline made the mistake of not taking out of service an airplane that had had similar problems without tragic results just the previous day, that, you know, maybe the pilots made some mistakes too. And so there was at least that ambiguity there, whereas this time, although, you know, we still know a lot less about what precisely caused this one, this time, you know, that's all gone away, and everybody said, yes, as you mentioned earlier, you know, these two disasters involving this one type of aircraft that makes up a very small percentage of the global fleet in less than 5 months, you know, and here we are.
Once again, I have to ask that question. It is a very legitimate question. What is making an airplane manufacturer believe that it has the ultimate judgment or the standard of judgment to know what is modification and what is not, what information to share, what information not to share. As we have seen, it's already become quite a critical issue. Secondly, whether there has been enough checks and balances in the overall system of airplane manufacturing industry, and who will call the standard, who will check on the qualities, as we have very few monopolies in the industry. That is a big question to ask. It's not just about the lives being lost this time, but future lives could be lost as a result of not having a good system to begin with. Mr. Wise, may I go to you again? Direct answer, please.
Yeah. Well, you know, the airframe and aircraft manufacturers work very closely with the aviation authorities, the FAA in this country, the CAAC in China, and those other agencies around the globe. I mean, this is their bread and butter. They determine, along with the regulatory agency, the requirements that are necessary to make an aircraft airworthy. They work very closely, hand in hand, in conjunction with each other, to make sure that the certifications are safe and that the aircraft that are being produced are going to be sound aircraft. Remember, these are large industries that want to make sure that they stay in business. They have nothing to gain when their reputation is on the line and it's besmirched by incidents or accidents like this.
Well, they have nothing to gain, but there are a lot of lives already lost. That is the issue here. It's not just about the stock market that they have a plunge, but rather really lives are being lost. That's a totally different issue, a totally different nature. Having said that, though, Ms. He, I want to go to you also about your observation as well. Of course, you are not an aviation expert like the other two gentlemen, but from your perspective, what do you make of the nature of the incident like this and the earlier one?
Well, actually, Ethiopian Airlines is the strongest one and in the Africa continent. And for myself, I have been taking this Ethiopian Airlines for many, many times. You know, dates back to like decades ago. So it has been serviced in a very good way. Even that from Addis Ababa to the Kenya, Nairobi, this distance, I also have been taken this Ethiopian Airlines. So this, you can imagine this is such a big shock to me when I hear those, you know, the tragedy. And plus, there are 8 Chinese, those young, you know, engineers that also lost their life there. So I think we cannot blame saying this is something wrong about the Africa, those air, you know, those air flight and some airport like security check. This time around, I think it's targeting to the airplane, the quality itself, right, like our 2 experts have just mentioned, because this shows the similar symptoms exactly like happened in Indonesia, the airline. So just you know, several months ago. So just a short time, just 6 minutes, and then immediately the plane and then crashed to the ground. So I think the Boeing, this company, they should take a big lesson of this. So I fully, I think, appreciate it. A lot of, you know, the air company, and they have grounded this kind of, you know, the model, because the security should be the first and most priority for everything.
Right. Well, Mr. Kaplan, what does that mean for Boeing, for example, one of the most well-known and certainly have a dominating impact on the industry itself? The stock market certainly has been doing very bad. Meanwhile, the reputation totally ruined this time, in people's memory, at least, recent memory. So, Mr. Kaplan, what do you make of it?
You know, a lot of pressure on Boeing, obviously, to get this right. Look, there's still every possibility that we will look back decades from now on this as a very tragic start to what ultimately will end up being a successful aircraft program. Airlines have a lot of enthusiasm for this aircraft, had a lot of enthusiasm. They've ordered 5,000 of them because of the improved economics, the improved range, to be able to, you know, cross oceans with a rather small airplane, and other improvements. And so, you know, all of that is still the case. And many of these airlines can't easily switch without a lot of cost to themselves. Many airlines who have ordered this updated 737 did so partly because, you know, they were operators of previous generation 737s. And in fact, that was part of Boeing's pitch to airlines was that, as Mr. Weiss described, the minimal retraining, for example, easier for a pilot who flew a different 737 to fly this plane than it would be for a pilot flying, let's say, the Airbus 320, the competing model, 320 family, to fly this plane. So, if they get this right and learn those lessons and give everybody confidence that this plane is safe to fly, then there's every possibility that they'll be fine. Although it will cost them, no question here.
But just as you said, Mr. Kaplan, I have to come in here because it sounds like you're explaining for the industry rather than being a journalist. I have to say that once the reputation is being ruined, which includes the words coming from Boeing guaranteeing to the others there's going to be very little retraining you have to do as a result of the so-called modification, then nobody, at least in the near future, are going to trust Boeing anymore. People are going to scrutinize every statement that Boeing made and every kind of model that has been on the market new. So that is the issue we're talking about here.
Right, no, absolutely. They are under the microscope. You're right about that. No, I'm not explaining for them. I'm explaining the position that they took. Obviously here now we've seen what's happened. And when you look back, there's a history of companies that have had things go wrong and have managed to restore their reputation, and there are other companies that haven't. Boeing is a company that had a long and good reputation. And so the pressure's on them now to maintain that by taking the steps that they need to take. There are other aircraft that you can look back at. Let's say the DC-10. Some people with long memories might remember a tragic series of events in the late 1970s, and that aircraft program never did recover. The difference there is that the fundamental economics of that program, the plane was kind of becoming obsolete anyway. In this case, it's an airplane that the airlines want to believe in. So
you're saying the airlines are to be blamed for this, right? You're saying the airlines totally should be blamed for this. Is that what you're trying to say? It sounds like that.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Obviously, I mean, we'll have to see the result of the investigations, but Boeing made the airplane. It's to say that, airlines bought this plane for the same fundamental reasons that airlines buy Airbus 320s, for example. And, yeah.
Right. Mr. Weiss, go to you about that. The aviation industry is a very unique industry, I have to say. Because of the safety issue, people tend to rather ignore the so-called issue of monopoly. There are only a few names in the industry that's really making a global impact, but rather looking at the qualities. And now we have a trusted name, namely this time Boeing, ruined itself, its own reputation, with 2 accidents already, and a system that certainly there are issues that have to be discussed about the authority of an airplane manufacturer in its discussion about quality with the rest of the society. So, Mr. Weiss, what would this mean if we could ever learn some lesson? Of course, we would need to wait for the investigation result, but still, at this time, some information are already very clear. Is this still going to shake up the aviation industry? If not, when?
Well, historically, whenever you have an incident or an accident, there's always going to be a look back. How can we improve safety? Safety is an ongoing event. It just doesn't end when an airplane rolls out of the factory. There are always modifications, always information coming out about how to make it better, how to make it safer, how to do better training. And I think what you're going to find from this accident, these 2 accidents, are going to be, certainly more scrutiny on the manufacturer. But I also think what you're going to find is that when modifications to aircraft are made in the future that affect the flight envelope, then instead of giving out, say, handouts to pilots or just putting another paragraph or 2 paragraphs in a manual, I think what you're going to get is they're going to bring back the crews and they're going to say, okay, based upon what's happened before, what have we learned? We now need to put you into a simulator for an hour, for 2 hours, whatever it would be, so that you can train on this and you can understand it and you can be better prepared.
Right.
Now, situations are always going to come up, but when you go into a cockpit, understanding the machine better than you did before, that's a step towards safety that has to be taken.
All right. But on the other hand, the scrutiny that we are talking about here, if the system do not change, future incidents like this going to happen, because it's really up to the airline manufacturer to say whatever is important to its customers around the world. That is the real issue here. It's not just about the technical issue. It's the issue of how the system is working. Mr. Weiss, very briefly from you before we go to the Chinese guest.
Well, look, airlines are financial institutions with wings. Their business is to make money. They don't want to put an airplane on the ground. It doesn't make money for them. But by the same token, the airline has to be safe, and it has to be viewed as being a safe company to fly on. You also don't want to have a crew. I certainly wouldn't want to get on an airplane. And wouldn't want any of my family or friends to get on an airplane if there was any question about the level of safety.
Right.
I also know that when we had any issues at my old company, which I'm very proud of, they've done a lot in fact, that model airplane had multiple sensors that wouldn't have failed as these two have done. The level of training that they bring you to gives you the confidence that when you go to work, when you fly an airplane, that the people who are sitting in the back of the airplane, you treat them like family because you're treated that way.
We don't want to have advertisement for any airline and any airplane manufacturers here on our program. It is very important from the customer's perspective to make it as safe as possible. If that system is ill, fix it. Before we go, very briefly from you, Ms. He, you have probably 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think all of our discussion is about one thing, that is technical innovation, and also with this safety issue. So, of course, human beings like development also needs those help coming from technical innovation. But without very mature those technical innovation, better we just slow down our pace. So I think I fully agree with this time around President Trump. His Twitter, he said, rather than have scientists like Einstein sitting there, he preferred to have a very professional pilot sitting in the plane in control of this plane. I think I fully agree with that. Slow down some paces, put the safety at the first and the priority concern.
And of course, it takes more than just pilot. It takes a safe plane to begin with. Thank you so much, Mark Weiss, Seth Kaplan, and He Wenping, coming to our discussion from your own perspective. Safety for everyone, we hope. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. America's own human rights record in 2018. A blind eye on its own right, some say. Is that true? Coming up, discussion. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. China has issued a report on human rights violations in the United States in 2018. The report unveils violations in a wide range of activities, including gun violence, unauthorized surveillance of citizens' online activities, and its unilateral policies.
Pointing fingers at over 190 countries, but turning a blind eye toward human rights violations on its own soil. That's according to the Human Rights Record of the United States in 2018, a report released by China on Thursday. Beijing's report comes one day after Washington's State Department blasted China as being in, quote, a league of its own for alleged violations of human rights. The report points out that nearly 60,000 shootings took place in the U.S. in 2018, which killed almost 15,000 people. It also notes the sharp rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric since last year's midterm elections and record-high hate crimes in 2018. In addition, the report says only 1% of the population in America controls nearly 40% of its social wealth, while almost 20 million Americans are living in extreme poverty. It also raises the U.S. government's PRISM program, which conducts unauthorized surveillance of citizens' online activities. Beijing also criticized Washington's immigration policies that have separated families. It says women and children seeking shelter and asylum are suffering from abuse and sexual assault. Meanwhile, the worrying living conditions of African Americans and gender inequality in American society are also covered in the report.
For more discussion on the human rights issue around the world, we're now joined in our Beijing studio Liu Hua-wen, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Human Rights of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome, sir. Also joining us in Beijing studio, Rick Dunham, Co-Director of Global Business Journalism at Tsinghua University. He's originally Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief of Houston Chronicle. Welcome as well, sir. I want to begin by asking you, not necessarily what has China done, what has the United States done, what has the UK done, but rather a global issue of protecting human rights these days. Rick, go to you first. From a journalist perspective, you see the world is changing so fast. Unilateralism, protectionism on the rise. Countries are losing standards rather than holding on to the standards that the international community has agreed to for decades. What can we do about the realities?
Well, I don't really think that there is much that we can do as a global community if you have a rise of nationalism and a rise of whatever nation it is saying they are first. Because so many nations say that what is done within their borders is not the business of anyone else. It's a domestic concern. And so I think that what we can do is try to have some global standards and call nations out when they do things wrong, no matter what, no matter if it's our own nation or if it's another nation.
But Mr. Liu, on the other hand, will this global system of protection human rights evolving into something like, well, I protect the human rights within my border. I don't care whether you have human rights or not anymore. Will a system evolve in that direction? Will that cause concern, at least if that is the direction?
I see nowadays the human rights is a hot term inside the country and outside the country. Last year, the United Nations and so many countries celebrated 70th anniversary of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That means we have international standards, we have the common purposes, and how to do that? I remember that the General Secretary of the UN gave a speech in the Human Rights Council UN. He said, today the world is more uncertain and more dangerous for human rights realization. With this as background, I see the states, the peoples around the world should be united, should work together.
Well, should there be a lot of should, but actually it's not, right? And that's the issue here. So, Rick, to you, I mean, if you think about the geopolitics now has become such a priority for a lot of countries. That is much more than the other issues. And as a result, how can we avoid the pitfalls of the Cold War in terms of protecting human rights around the world, whether it's McCarthyism or some of the other issues in the former Soviet bloc?
Yes, I think the first thing is speak truth to power. Talk about, I mean, yes, there are United Nations standards. If you see violations and have evidence, speak up. Let the people you're accusing, the country you're accusing, defend itself. But I think that's the only way you can do it. You have to have unanimity in the United Nations to get almost anything done. And so if you fall into that Cold War dichotomy, somebody's going to veto it. United States, Russia, China. So you have to figure out ways to get as much agreement as possible. But then if there's disagreement, you call the other side out. That's what happened today. The United States had its own report from the Secretary of State's office, and then China responded with an attack on the United States.
And as a result?
As a result, the issues are out there, and we're talking about them.
Mr. Liu, about that too, there are what some call different ways of understanding human rights. For example, the so-called rights of existence, that has been China's basic standard to begin with, because China is a developing country and China argues that as long as the right of existence is being respected, then there will be other kinds of human rights that can be achieved on top of this. But there are other standards in other countries. It's just a matter of fact. Therefore, Mr. Liu, can we use different systems of understanding human rights as a way of talking across to each other, rather talking to each other?
I see we have the common goals, but all roads lead to Rome. So the way to implement, to realize human rights could be different. So the development levels are quite different. So the different countries should have their own methods, their own way to improve human rights. Meanwhile, today, much more than before, it's quite necessary for all the countries to work together to face the challenges. So when we say that there are some negative trends, but always there is also opportunities.
Right. I like your philosophical way of putting it, but there are some concrete issues we have to face. Rick, for example, the new technologies. It provides the opportunity for all of us to prosper and communicate, and it's beautiful. But on the other hand, it also provides opportunities for different kinds of levels of entities to have information about individuals in the society that the individuals are not aware of. Right. Or eventually could work against the individual, even though the individual is totally doing illegal things. So that is the issue here. That is a human rights issue between an individual and governments and business community. That kinds of human rights decades ago was not the issue, but now it is increasingly so.
Technology and privacy
PRISM,
are going to be
the project,
are going to be, but technology, privacy are going to be great human rights issues of the next several decades. So much technology is being built for security that can be used to collect information, whether it's Google or the Chinese government. Right. And we just have to decide where the limits are.
Well, we have also some interesting news. It's not just about whether the rights of existence, but also the shared rights of having access to public services. For example, education. Recently, the biggest news coming out of the United States is dozens of people were charged in a U.S. college admission scam. Officials say that the scam started in 2011 and that a total of $25 million were paid by wealthy parents to have their children admitted to elite schools like Yale and Stanford. Among those charged are 3 scam organizers, 33 parents, 9 coaches, and 1 college administrator. Now, Yale University and University of Southern California both are well recognized around the world, said in separate statements that they were cooperating with the investigators about this. The scandal is causing anger and shock among students of different nationalities. Now, those 2 universities are well respected and still today. But the question really is, this is only just one scandal in the United States, but that could be also issues facing around the world, whether people have real, fair access to all the public goods, even though those are 2 private universities, but still, access to education, access to welfare is the key issue here. Rick, briefly from you.
Well, I mean, first I will say education, healthcare, universal access is the way that you move up in society, and I think that that's absolutely essential. I think this scandal in the United States is something that is uniformly looked at as terrible. I think it's rather narrow. I think we should talk about the broad issues, not say that this is happening everywhere, but it's people who have money, people of influence are trying to get an unfair advantage in society.
Right. A lot of issues related to human rights that we would not have time to comb through for today's discussion, but I'm sure we'll be able to, we hope, be able to deal with them on time being for the future. Thank you so much for the 2 of you for being with us. Liu Huawen coming from China and Rick Dunham from the United States. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight. We'll be back with an exclusive interview on reform to China's foreign investment rules after this short break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Earlier, I interviewed Zhang Mao, the Minister of the State Administration for Market Regulation from China. His department has streamlined access for foreign investors in China with one-stop shop. He's also saying that there is more than a silver lining to negotiations between China and the U.S. It's an opportunity to work on previous practices to better fit China into the global system. This is Ian. Minister Zhang, what a pleasure to see you on CGTN. First question for you, of course, is the foreign investment law about services provided to the foreign investors from your perspective.
From the perspective of our Market Supervision Department, the major services we provide to investors have to do with the ease of accessing the market. We're already working on reforms to our services. For example, investors only need to go through one department in getting a foreign investment certificate instead of two, like what it used to be, which sped up the process for foreign invested enterprises.
Also, another thing is about the role between, or rather among, foreign investors, foreign companies, state-owned companies, SOEs, and also private companies. At your annual press conference, you are talking about the equal treatment to all of them. But exactly how? People want to know more details.
Yeah. 李克强总理的政府工作报告讲了一个竞争中性的原则。
The government work report delivered by Premier Li Keqiang has stressed the principle of competitive neutrality, which requires fair supervision. As a regulatory authority, we supervise all companies in neutral ways, no matter it is a Chinese enterprise, a foreign enterprise, a private company, or a state-owned one. We treat all of them the same under Chinese law, without any discrimination and any kind of ownership. We should shift our focus from the concept of ownership in a fair market. We encourage all enterprises to carry on with normal business operation, observing law and discipline. Punishments against companies are meted out if they violate the law.
Earlier this year, there's a regulation coming out suggesting local government officials should be responsible for food safety and many other issues. Minister Zhang, help us to understand how does that work with the rule of law and regulations like that, as well as the local government's role and your administration.
因为这个在食品安全方面，这确实是一个
Food safety is very important, a priority of our organization. It is necessary to ensure food security for people. The central government seeks to improve food security among regional party and government leadership, which is the same as we had before, and carry out the requirements of our food safety law, because regional party and government leaders are responsible for policies in our country. The central government is usually working on the standards, but the supervision needs the efforts of local leaders. Although we have lower-level market supervision departments, they are supervised by local party committees and the government. Therefore, the local party committees and governments should assume responsibility for food safety, which will help curb food safety problems and motivate them to work on it.
In 2018, your administration for market regulation established. People wonder, how do you, in the new year, going to be able to allocate all your resources and focus to find the right way on the regulation part, and also to make sure eventually the safety and many other issues related?
我觉得这次机构改革呢是
I think the main problem of this institutional reform is to solve problems of gaps, duplication, overlap issues, and unclear duties of the market supervision and law enforcement in the past. The integration of market regulators is mainly solving the problem of comprehensive law enforcement and supervision. This is one side of the issue. On the other hand, institutional reform requires changes in the functions of the government. Our government has intervened too much in the microeconomy, which makes changes a long-term task. Although the institutions have been combined, it's still a huge responsibility for us to transform governmental functions. Also, combining comprehensive law enforcement and professional law enforcement is a new challenge to us, as each department has professionals focusing on certain areas, like the intellectual property rights of food, medicine, etc. This is the top issue this year.
The U.S.-China negotiations are still going on right now, as you may know, Minister Zhang. So from your perspective, how do you see the latest development? What role do you think your administration will be able to play?
这次中美谈判当中
During the latest negotiation between China and the U.S., there are many parts related to us. For example, the issue of intellectual property rights has been highlighted, and the problem of business environment. To change our original measures, we should all follow the international rules during the negotiating process. which will promote the globalization of the economy and better integration with the international economic environment. We have little experience in protecting intellectual property rights, so it is still necessary for us to learn better practices from other countries. That will help with innovation and help advance technological improvement, including the quality of development and products. I think the negotiation is a positive improvement.
So you are hopeful about the results?
Of course, the outcome is hard to tell, but I think we should absorb what we should improve on or what we need to do better in the future. It is important to make sure our business rules and business environment fit with international standards.
Thank you so much, Minister Zhang. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That is Zhang Mao, the Minister from State Administration for Market Regulation, talking to us exclusively. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.